All right, guys. Welcome to Lesson 4 in Old Norse for Reenactors. Yeah, really 4. So today is brought to you by the number tver. The accusative of tver is tva, genitive tvegja, and dative tvemja. So last week we went over a fair amount of stuff as far as adjectives and also the verb to be, which I'm going to throw that up one more time. Today we're going to be focusing on the runes and how to write with them. So unfortunately we won't be building as much off of last week as I would like, but it's an important thing to know. So we will get some review in because I'm going to try and steal some of those words. Hey, and Nikki, I know you're taking notes over there, so let me know if I'm not holding up anything long enough so that you can copy it down. I don't know if any of these other hooligans are actually writing anything. Hey, and you're on the right video this week. Good job. So just to review the verb to be. With pronouns as well. So ek, im, du, ert, that, ver, erum, there, eruth, thou, eru. So I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, y'all are, they are. Oh, looks like we lost Randy already. So tonight we're talking about the runes and how to use them in writing Old Norse. And there is a little bit of clarification that needs to be made as far as the use of these. So when it comes to talking about runes, there are 3 major types which people refer to. There is the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark, and the Anglo-Saxon Futhork. So spelled like this. The Elder Futhark is what a lot of people have seen, especially if you look at, for instance, rune sets that are sold in metaphysical shops, or they're really popular on the internet. In the Elder Futhark, there are 24 letters divided into 3 groups of 8, or ats. At means family or clan, but it also can mean group of 8, which is why that word became really important for a little while. Hey, Randy. Now, the Elder Futhark is what you would think if you hear Old Norse and Elder Futhark. You would think that since both of those things mean old, that would work. Not the case, however. Yes, Nikki, those are definitely Elder Futhark. However, the Elder Futhark is used for Proto-Norse and even some Proto-Germanic. So when it comes to our reenacting purposes, these are too early even for most of, if not all of, the Sons of Loki guys. Wiggly, if you're on, let me know how far back, or if you know off the top of your head, how far back Sons of Loki goes as far as time period. For reference, the Elder Futhark went out of use in the early to mid 700s. So I think that's too early for y'all. I know that you've had at least one guy that works with Vindel period that I've seen post up on the group before, and Vindel would use Elder Futhark. So of the 3 I mentioned earlier, that's a quick overview of Elder Futhark. If you want to work more on that, those are the ones I actually know best. So I can do another video on that later, or we can talk about that privately. Of those 3 that we mentioned, the Elder, the Younger, and the Anglo-Saxon, we're not talking about Anglo-Saxon because nobody likes English, and your Saxons cheat because their spears are too long. Yeah, that's what I thought. So the Younger Futhark, and I'll explain what that word means here in just a minute if you don't know already, only has 16 letters. It's still divided into 3 ats, and it's groups of 6, 5, and 5. Now, the Younger Futhark was obviously not made by linguists because it is grossly inadequate for representing the language itself. Obviously, you see the transition from the Elder Futhark with 24 letters, the paring down of that to 16 with the Younger Futhark. It does add for some complications and things, and we'll see that as we go. So, there is another complication which will be the word of tonight, will be complication. In that there are two different forms of younger Futhark. There is the long branch and the short twig. And if you go a little bit later than our period, somewhere around the very, very late 9th to mid 10th, there's actually a staveless as well. It wasn't used very often, so I'm not going to go over it, and it's really confusing. Now, the names of the letters and the sounds they represent are the same in both of the long branch and short branch. The primary difference is where they were used. So the Danish primarily used the long branch, and the short twig is more prominent in Sweden and Norway. There is some speculation that part of the divergence here between those two branches is what they were writing on primarily. So the long branch is more angular. So for instance, I'll show you the first letter, and then we can use that as a starting point as to going. The first letter in the, let me make this look a little bit better, in the long branch versus the short branch, you can see that the long branch tends to be more angular, and the short branch is a little bit more rounded. It's almost like standard script versus cursive. The Danish tend to carve into stone more often, and that's where a lot of the archaeological finds of the runes have been found, or are found on stones in Denmark, while the Swedish and Norwegian variants were carved in wood, or in the later period they were actually written down in bøker, or books. So you can see there's a little bit of difference there, but not a whole lot. For the most part, at least for the first few letters, the long branch and the short branch do not change much. So if you only see me put one form up, it'll be the long branch form. And I will try and make that as a reminder. Oh, and I needed to explain Futhark. And the best way I know how to do that is to also explain a word that you use pretty often, because it's the exact same. Alphabet is literally based off of the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, literally alpha, beta. Futhark is based off of the first 6 letters of the runic alphabet. In some cases in historical academia, you may see it under a couple different names. Such as the Norman ACV Darium, or let me see if I can find this other name, because it's Celtic and I don't write Celtic very well. At least I don't know it very well. the Oum Lach Lenach. So you've got the Norman ACB Darium and the Oum Lach Lenach, which means the Oum of the Scandinavians. And that second one is found in the Book of Ballymote. I know that some of you Sons of Loki guys are big fans of the Celtic languages, so I figured that was a nice little note to make. All right, so Futhark, obviously the first letter would be an F, or a F sound at least. That's the one I just showed you, and it was actually our letter of the day last week. And this will also let me show you the form that I'm going to go over all of the letters with. So at the top will be the actual inscription letter itself. And like I said, if there's only one included, then the long branch and the short branch are pretty much the same. The name of the rune in this case is Fe, which translates in English as wealth, but is often thought of in terms of cattle or sheep. It is a direct cognate with English in the word fee. The transliteration of the letter Fehu is the name for the Elder Futhark rune. Nicole, thanks for asking that. That is actually the Proto-Germanic name, and it actually translates to the same thing. Fehu is cattle. Fee is just the Old Norse form of that word. So if you see this letter as an inscription, you would transcribe it as the letter F. And the sound that is realized there is directly a letter F. So an example for using this letter, well, we'll keep it kind of easy. And this will get easier as we go on and we add more letters. So the name of this letter in runes would simply be Fe, transcribed as Fi, and realized as F long E. I realize I should probably explain what I mean by the difference in the transcription and the realization. So if you are to look at, say, the Rock runestone in Denmark, you may see, here I'll just, because I know this one's on there. You would see the runes like this. So this is just Futhark, the first 6 letters. Now, a runologist or a linguist that studies runes, when they are transcribing this, would transcribe it like this. So F-U thorn hook A, or A ogonek, just go with hook A, R-C. And then they would take that information back and go back and be able to decode it to what we recognize as Futhark. The reason for this transcription, as we'll see a little bit more, is that a lot of letters can mean different things. So, as an example, that same exact rune setup, that same exact transliteration could also be Folderb. Again, like I said, the word of tonight will be complication. So, what I'm going to show you in the form, I'm going to put the example for Faye back up. And I'm going to try and write it a little bit larger for you this time. Is you'll see the transliteration, what would be written down if you were a runologist studying an actual inscription, and then how that letter could be realized. So Faye can only be realized as an F. And the next letter will let me show you some of that complication. So that's Faye. Are there any questions on that one so far, or on how I'm doing this? Anything like that? If so, go ahead and shoot them over while I am getting the next letter set up. And just as a note, Nikki, this one will also be, they'll all have different names than what you're used to seeing when you're looking at, when you're actually looking at the Elder Futhark, just because there's some evolution. Some words completely change meaning, some of them actually just don't exist anymore. All right. So our next letter. This is another one that there is the same variant in both branches of Younger Futhark. It's called Ur, and it means iron. Just as a side note, the U rune, Uruz in Proto-Norse, or Proto-Germanic, and Ur in Anglo-Saxon changes drastically across all three. So in Anglo-Saxon, this means rain, the Ur rune, and the Uruz in Elder Futhark means Auroch. So this is one of those ones that changes a lot. It's also, word of the day, complicated. Or can be realized, it's transcribed as a U, but it can be realized as a U, a V, a W, a Y, an O, or an O slash. So, an example that everyone will be at least somewhat familiar with is Thor. And this is the accusative form of the name. I'll get into the complicated nominative in a little bit. But the god of thunder, the Marvel hero, his name in Younger Futhark looks like this. So you can see that even though this would be transliterated as Thur, we know from context clues in the inscription or from just from our Old Norse knowledge that that word would be Thor. So again, the Or rune, which is transcribed as a U, can be a U, a V, a W, a Y, an O, and an O slash. It is, looking at my notes, it is the most expansive letter, we'll say. It covers the most, so you won't have to worry so much about this one, but if you're doing some transcription later, then yeah, you gotta be careful with this one. And at the end of the video, someone try and remind me about, oh wow, it's already 8:40. Okay, this video is gonna run over. Sorry. I'm gonna try, and we may actually have to just continue this into next week. I'm gonna try and get through at least the first 6. Anybody know what time I actually got started? Anyway, I'll get started on the next one, which is actually one we just talked about. Makes life easy. The next rune is Thurs. It is that first letter that we just saw in the word Thor. And again, it's that funky, one of those funky letters. In fact, it covers 2 of those funky letters that we don't have in modern English. So, the letter is Thurs, which means giant. It's transcribed as the letter Thorn, which is just the modern variant of the same letter. And it can mean both the letter Thorn and the letter Ed. So it's both of those TH sounds. So, for example, I'll show you an example of both of its forms. Okay, so I can run a few minutes over. I got about 30 minutes left. That makes things better. All right. So for an example of both of its sounds, we'll go back to that example we had last one of Thor, or Thor. And then his father, Odin, gives you an example of the third rune being both the th as in Thor and z as in Odin. if you hadn't picked up the difference between the thorn, which is the thing that looks like a thorn on a vine, or the edge, which looks like a D slash, think about this and that. Cis and that, or thistle and that. So going from one fairly simple, from a complicated rune to a very simple rune, and back to another complicated rune, we bring in the rune Os. And it's complicated because it's not something you would normally think about in its realization. So we have the long branch, or the Danish form, and the Swedish Norwegian short twig form. Again, this is the form. This is the word os, which means God, more or less. It's the singular form of a word you may be more familiar with if you read the myths and legends, Asia. And it's transcribed as this hooked A. Good job, Nick. Now, for context as to what this means in realization, don't look at the bottom yet. I'm going to hide that from the camera yet. So the old form of this word that I just halfway erased, and to some extent, especially among the Danes in our particular period of time, which was the Viking Age, of course, would have been more pronounced as Ansio. And the name of this would be more pronounced like Ons. So this hooked A, you can think of being almost like an AN. So realized as an A, an O, or an ash. You only ever use this letter if these letters are followed by N, or in some cases used to be followed by N in Old Norse. Again, complicated. So for the perfect example, the one we've already been talking about, the word Asia, and I'll do both variants, long branch and short branch for you. Actually, that's wrong. The long branch form, Asia, or Ansia, and the short twig form, Ansia. Don't worry about that R at the end. I'll talk about why it's different compared to the other R we've seen already and the R we cover next. And you can also definitely see vast difference between the long branch and the short twig. But you can see that this would be, even though modern translation of this word does not have that in, since it existed in some forms of the pronunciation, that N is still realized as ansia. And the transliteration, just so you can see it if I write that later, would be seen like this, that A hook, S-I, small capital R. Again, I'll cover that later. It's a beast into its own being. So does that make sense? That's one, honestly, that trips me up a little bit, especially with that example, which is why I gave it to you. So while I'm getting the next one written down, just ask for clarification if you need it on that one, because it's kind of heavy in the idea that it's not anything like what we would think of. And if I'm going too fast, please stop me. All right, y'all got that one. That's, I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty. That makes me feel good if I explained it well enough that you'll think you'll have that, because it took me a while. So the next letter we're covering should be almost immediately apparent as being a letter R. The name of it is Reith, and it means to ride, or ride, like going on a long ride. It is transcribed as a lowercase r, and it is realized as an R. I'll take this opportunity again to remind you that R's in our period of time are not pronounced like we pronounce them, but they are rolled slightly. So this would be Reith. You know, just a quick tap, kind of. So as an example for the Reith rune is Reisi. And there's the short branch version of Reisi. And let me put down the transliteration of that as well. So a Reisi, if you're unfamiliar, is a type of giant. Not much to be said about that. Again, you can see the difference in the long branch versus the short twig here. That one's pretty straightforward. It makes pretty logical sense. It's one of the few that you can look at even if you've never studied the runes before and go, I bet that's an R. And if you're playing along at home, the next letter, if you remember what this whole alphabet is called, would have to be a C or a K rune. And you would be right. The name of the rune is Kaum. Shaped like this. Kaum means ulcer. transcribed as a K. Just as a side note, some transcribers will put this down as a C. I'm going to utilize the K because it's not, if it's a C, it's a hard C. So as in caught, as opposed to as in receive. And it can be realized as a K or a G. So, or like I said, as a C, but that just makes for things confusing. So, as an example of this, I'll pull one of our words from last week, and I'm gonna pull a couple words from last week. To see if I can't get both the C and the K and the G form. Let's see, I can go with and to go ahead and do the translations or transliterations. All right, so here you see at the beginning of the word, which is cult, which, if you remember from last week, is cold. So cold. And then in its G form, you can see in Megan, which I've only done the transliteration here. I haven't written down the original form, which the one I gave you last week for both of these are realized like that. So again, you can see that there's some weird plays there. This combination of letters, the K and the G, makes linguistic sense if you, and I can explain this pretty easily, if you take your hand and place it right there at the soft spot on your throat there, right above your collarbone, and you say "ka" and "the," or it's best realized with "s," like you're hissing, and "z," like you're a cartoon who's asleep. You'll feel that with the "s" or with the "ka," there's no vibration, and with the "z" or the "ga," you'll feel the vibration there. That's what we refer to as a voiceless versus voiced letter, where they are literally the exact same letter in how your mouth forms them. Lacey's over here about to die. But so you'll have that difference between a voiceless, which is the K, and the voiced, which is a G. So the mouth forms in the same way. It's just whether or not you give that, your vocal cords, a vibration there as to the way it sounds. And there's a lot of combining of the voiceless and voiced in the letters. But that is just me going off on a linguistic tangent, which you will occasionally have to deal with because I'm pretty much talking to myself and it will drive me crazy. Trick, short drive. So our next letter, which if you're keeping track, we have gone through the first at of letters. We start off with hagel. So the long branch, the Danish branch, is seen here, and the short twig, the Swedish Norwegian. Hagel means hail, like that big clumps of ice that fall from the sky. It's transliterated as an H, and it's realized as an H. Pretty straightforward one there. For the most part, the complicated ones are done. They do us the favor of getting the complicated ones out of the way. So for the example there, I'll do a word we say pretty often. And I'll give you both branches, since this one does have both forms. So here you see the long branch and the short branch of the word hälsa. You'll notice, if I do the transliteration like I should have, that you only see one vowel there. The doubling of letters, which will explain that the E and the I there are the same rune. Runes aren't doubled in younger Futhark transcriptions. So, see if I can find another good example of that has this letter in it. All right, here's a pretty good one. I'll give you both forms of it as well. So the very last adjective we covered last week is holor, which was the one that meant either that a lord is gracious or a subject is loyal. So you can see again, there's the long branch and the short twig variants of the same word. It would be transliterated as H-U-L capital R, but it's realized as H-O-L-L-R. So again, you see that there's no doubling of that rune there. And again, that final R is a curveball. And I'm going to keep throwing it at you, even though it's the very last rune that we're going to cover, because that's how I do things. And we're going to go in order of how they're typically written. So that was hagel. And I'll go ahead and warn you, for most of what's left, there are two different forms, between the long branch and the short branch. So are there any questions so far, or everybody kind of keeping up? All right, everyone's going to keep up. Love it. go ahead and get y'all an example on here at the same time. And I am going to challenge you, because we've covered all of the letters in this one now. Oh, video on my end froze. Let's see if it's still working now. No, Nicole, we will not cover Dagaz. It's not listed as one of the younger Futhark. Though it is an Anglo-Saxon, which is where you're getting Dag from. So Nalvar is our next letter. So long branch, short twig, Nalvar, which means need. It's transliterated as an N and is realized as an N and an N only. So there is the long branch and short twig versions of the same letter. It's a word we covered last week. I won't even do that in case you're looking. So see if you can transliterate this word and shoot it to me over on the chat. And bonus points if you recognize it and can give me the actual word. I'll give you all a few seconds on that one. Don't see anybody typing. All right, you can pause the live video if you need to, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the transliteration and the realization. So I'm not just sitting here blankly staring at you forever, because it's awkward for all of us. So the transliteration would be F-U-R-N. The actual word is form, and it means old. Ah, there you go. Nikki came through for me. Randy, I'm going to make you study with her. All right. Whoa. Another note on the runes is we don't mark the long accents. So the little dash that goes over a lot of the letters when we're writing in English, you don't see. And when it comes to the vowels, because I realize I haven't been putting the long forms on there, just kind of take it for granted that I think in all cases, the long forms of the vowels are included with the short forms. So our next letter is just that straight line stroke right there. It is Isa. It means ice. It is transliterated as a I and realized as an I or an E. And for our example here, one that everybody won't recognize, but will at least know. Oh, and I spelled it wrong. So let me pull that down real quick. And while I have it there, caught myself in my own trick that I was going to throw at you. While I have it down here, I'll go ahead and give you the transliteration. And I'll see if anybody can tell me what it means. It is a direct cognate in English. Randy's lagging hard. All right, so the transliteration, in which case I won't hold this over your heads and wait on Randy, who's 5 minutes behind us. So the long branch form and the short twig form and the transliteration, which is the ISL hook A T. So that would be realized once you study up on some Old Norse and what all of those weird, funky transliterations mean. As Iceland. So again, that hook A implies that there is a nasal marker behind it. So it could be an N or an M, which if you caught the trick I threw out there, the N is left out when that A is present. So when I wrote it the first time, I put the N in, or the mouth in. So this is one of those ones that when you look at the actual transliteration of the runes, if you don't know what that means or you don't have the context clues, it could be as foreign to you as if someone was writing in Greek with runes. So I'm going to do one more for tonight, and just to stick with the pattern of doing a really complicated one, last thing we do is that funky R that you've seen on the end of a couple of letters. Now, we are kind of doing this a little out of order from what I would typically do a class in that we have not yet gone over how to conjugate the nouns. So this concept, decline the nouns. I have a great linguist wife as well. So this letter, which this is the long branch, and the short branch, it's hard to tell when it's by itself, but it's a line that's low compared to everything else. It's pronounced year, and it means yew, like the type of tree. It's transliterated as a capital R, and it's best to say it's realized that way as well, but often when we actually see the words, it's just a regular lowercase r. So the Proto-Germanic, to go a little bit backwards here, which we talked about, is that early language that Norse evolved out of originally had a different nominative masculine ending. So I'll give you, see if I can figure out a good example I know of. Well, so the name for the god Odin in Proto-Germanic in the nominative form would be Wodenaz. Now, this Z on the end, and I'll show you the Elder Futhark for that. Which would have been like this, Wodenaz. This Z on the end, which marks its case, becomes an R in Old Norse. So now there's a lot of changes in this particular word. Get that a little bit closer so you can see it. So Wodenaz becomes Oldenar in the nominative case. Well, that ends up getting dropped. That's a completely different story. We'll just stick with that for the example at the moment. So what you see is the runes reflect that Z used to exist. And it becomes again, Wodenaz in the Elder Futhark becoming Oldenar. So you have this Z letter flipping and becoming that R. So the better way to write Oldenar here would be with that capital R. A good rule for how to figure out what R to use if you're going from the Latin script to the runic script is to look and see a lot of the time if that R exists in the English cognate, then it is the R that looks like our R. If it does not, then it goes away. So I'll show you the word for one of the runes we've already looked at. And I'll actually compare it to another name for the rune we've already looked at. So this is Nalvar, which was that in rune, and Nalvar means need. So you notice there's no R in the English version, and that R that's on the end gets this year rune. Now, Brave, which was the other R rune, is cognate to the English word ride. The R is there, so it gets that form of the R. Again, because I have to leave you with a complicated one, because we don't do anything easy around here, and there's very little easy when it comes to Old Norse. That's the breakdown of what that funky R is, and the reason you kept seeing it. So I mentioned, and this will be the last thing I talk about tonight, the name of the god Thor, which I mentioned very early on. In the nominative case, is Thor with two R's. But both of those R's are different. So Thor, and it has both the Rive and the Year runes, transliterated as Thorn, U, small r, big R, and translated as Thorn, O, R, R. I hope that doesn't make your head hurt too badly. We will pick up on the last 6. Yep, we have one more at to go. We'll do that next week. In the meantime, I've got a sheet that I am still working on. I was a little behind this week. But I've got a sheet that I'm still working on that I'm going to throw up that'll have all of the runes, their names, what they mean, long branch, short branch, and even a way to type them on any computer. Any Unicode supported computer, for those of you who know what that means, because I don't know what Apple uses. And I will try and be around. I'll have my phone on me for a while. So if you have questions, or if Randy ever catches up and finishes the video, then y'all can ask me some questions. Other than that, go the note. Hail.